Kia ora koutou katoa and welcome everyone to this community research webinar. I'm Janet Miller and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to host today's webinar on Appreciative Inquiry. Now firstly, I just want to thank you all for joining us this morning. I'd like to acknowledge the community groups and NGOs from throughout Aotearoa for tuning in today, and also a warm welcome to those from the US and Canada and other parts of the world. Ata Maree tātou katoa, he mihi mai oha kia koutou. Now, we're privileged to have three presenters sharing their experiences of Appreciative Inquiry today. Dave Timms and Maree Beaven will tell us about using Appreciative Inquiry with both individuals and groups in their community in Randwick Park, Manurewa. We also have Suzanne Grant here today. Suzanne has spent many years looking at Appreciative Inquiry in a research context, and this work led to the development of critical appreciative processes, which we will hear about later on. So first up, Suzanne will give us an introduction to Appreciative Inquiry. So I'd like to pass the rako over to you, Suzanne. Whānau mā, enjoy.
Right, thanks, Jenna. So really, Appreciative Inquiry is probably the easiest way to think about it. It's a mindset. It's the way you think about things. It's all about our perspective. And Einstein, he's known to have had a few impressive thoughts over the years. He came up with, or he pointed out that no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. So we need to learn to think of the world anew. So if we're faced with a situation or a challenge, we need to learn to think about it differently. And Appreciative Inquiry encourages us to think about it differently. So if we go on to the next slide, we're often trapped by the images we hold of ourselves. So the easiest way to think about this is if you think you can't do something, the chances are you won't be able to do it. If you think that you can achieve something positively or that you're capable of doing something, you've got a much better chance of achieving it. So as a background to Appreciative Inquiry, Appreciative Inquiry is a form of action research, so it's all about working with others. It's not sitting back and doing something on your own or sitting back and watching. It's a participative process, so you get involved in the process. And the basic surmise of it all is that it provides a positive rather than a problem-oriented lens. So you look at what's good in a situation, you focus on what's possible rather than what's wrong. So one of the easiest ways to describe it is if you imagine you're backing your car into a parking lot, and on one side of you, you've got a Ferrari, and on the other side of you, you've got a Lamborghini. As you're backing into the car park, probably the most common thing to be thinking of is, mustn't hit the Ferrari, mustn't hit the Lamborghini. And the more you focus on that, the more likely you actually are to do it. We experienced this when my daughter was really little. When I first started working with Appreciative Inquiry, she was learning to ride her bike, and she could ride along the road in a straight line along the footpath, but the minute she came to a tree or a letterbox, she would hit it. And we're like, what's the story? Why are you doing it? And she's like, I keep thinking, don't hit the tree, don't hit the tree, don't hit the letterbox. And of course, by thinking that, she was doing it. So it's just a really simple way of showing that if you focus on something, you're more likely to achieve it. So if you focus on a problem, you're going to get less positive outcomes. But if you focus on what is positive and what is possible, then you're more likely to get the positive outcome. Appreciative Inquiry can be used in lots of different ways. So it can be a way of knowing, a way of doing things. It can be used as a methodology for change. So I've used it in change management, and in a way, Dave and Maree are going to be talking about that later. It can also be used as a performance appraisal tool, an evaluation tool, a strategic planning tool, and you can also use it on personal level. So if you're trying to initiate change in your own life or the way you do things, again, Appreciative Inquiry can guide you in that. So typically, if we look at the definitions of appreciation, it's all about focusing on what is good. If you look at the literature, typically it talks about appreciate as in valuing, recognizing what gives strength to a situation, recognizing what's good in the world, perceiving what gives life and vitality. But in my own work, I've actually come to have a more enhanced version because my supervisor when I was studying, she used to say to me that she did music appreciation at school, and she said there was nothing good in the music that she had to learn to appreciate at school. So if you think about appreciation more as to know, just to be conscious of, to take a full and sufficient account of that, and I'll talk about it a bit later on, but that can help overcome any bias or balance imbalance that might come from. Some people think focusing on just the positive can lead to a distorted view, but we'll talk about that later. So appreciative inquiry is typically talked about as either a 4D or a 5D cycle. So the most important step is starting off with a positive choice. And again, I think Maree's got some examples on that she'll talk about with that later on. So you started off with a positive topic choice, and then you move into what they call discovery. So you're wanting to know what is the best things about the current situation. So when I was working with school boards of trustees, the types of question I was asking, saying to them, well, what's so amazing about your school? What do you love about your school? What makes people want to come and enroll their kids at their school? So what's the best there possibly is? After that, you move into what we call the dream phase. And so you're envisaging what might be the best in the future. So you're talking about, think 5 years out from here, what could be the best possible thing you might want to come back and see happening at your school? Or what's the best possible outcome you could hope for? And yeah, we're in a dream phase here. So make sure that when you're looking at that you're shackled by budgets won't allow this, or don't do this. Just encourage people to think freely and what's the best thing that they can achieve. From there, we move into the design and the destiny stages, and sometimes these can be a bit difficult to separate out. In some cases where people I know have done the design phase, but they've left the destiny because they've felt that as an outsider, if they've been involved with it, that they shouldn't actually sort of drive that stage. But so the design and the destiny phases are basically saying, this is what we're really good at, this is where we want to come, what we want to achieve, and whatever that time period is, how can we take what we're really good at as a starting point to move forward to achieve the dreams? And so that's when you start to design the steps that you might take and what you actually want to achieve, the change you want to achieve, and how you're going to get it. It all sounds very simple. It's just a planning phase, but there are actually 5 key principles that underline everything we talk about in appreciative inquiry. And if you look at them there on the screen, they look a bit scary. Constructionist principles, simultaneity, poetic principles, anticipatory principles. They're all a bit of a mouthful, but they're basically just key ways of thinking. So if we go to the constructionist principle first, basically, and this is one of the key parts to what we're talking about with appreciative inquiry, what we say, what we do, and what we think are all interlinked. So our knowledge, our language, and our action are all linked. What we say influences what we think influences what we do. And so if we're really conscious about the way we approach things, so if we're approaching things from a positive perspective, we're more likely to have more positive actions, more positive language. And it can just be something as simple as the words that you use can influence the tone of the process that you're doing. The principle of simultaneity, well, inquiry is intervention. The minute you ask a question, you are sowing the seed of change. So probably one of the biggest examples of this is I had a student doing some appreciative inquiry with for part of his PhD, and he was talking to a lady at an organisation and asking her about how her personal values aligned with the organisation she was working in and how she thought she was contributing and stuff like that. And he actually went back for the next session, and she said, "Oh, you really got me thinking. I've just decided I'm going to quit my job because I really don't fit in with this role." And that's a bit of an extreme example, and it's not necessarily a good example, but it shows that just by asking one question, you can sow the seeds of change. And so it's really important that the very first questions that you ask are positive, because you want to start off by sowing positive seeds of change. You don't want to sow negative seeds of change. If we go to the poetic principle, the next one, it's really important to recognize that everybody interprets the situation differently. So every single one of you out there watching this webinar or listening to this webinar will pick up on different things that are important to you. If you were to ask each of us as presenters what was important to us from this webinar, we'd all pick out different things too. So because the story is constantly being co-authored and re-authored, it's really important to recognize that we're all going to interpret situations differently. And so again, it's really important to have that positive lens to shape how the situation is going. The anticipatory principle, that's pretty much the Pygmalion effect. If we go into a situation thinking that a certain meeting we have to attend this afternoon is boring, or that we really don't want to do something, the chances are that meeting is going to be really boring, or that task we have to do is going to be really unpleasant. But if you go into a situation thinking, oh, this is going to be really good, I'm going to learn lots from this, we're going to achieve lots, well, then you're more likely to actually enjoy the process. And then finally, the positive principle, so which is what appreciative inquiry is probably the main thing about. The more positive the questions you ask, or the more positive the approach you take, it's been shown in research that the change is likely to be more long-lasting and more successful. So there's been research done into different types of change management, and change management where there's been a positive focus and the people involved in the change have helped shape it and develop it is more likely to be successful. So that's something really useful to remember. And then probably, so if you're anything like me, when the first time I read this or came across this, I thought, oh, this is just too good to be true. You can't be all warm and fuzzy. It's just too Pollyanna-ish. And I guess by saying too Pollyanna-ish, I know when I used to use that with my students, a lot of my students didn't even know who Pollyanna was. So if you don't know who Pollyanna was, go and check out the Disney stories, because Pollyanna is a very important person in history. She looked upon the bright side of everything. And so there is the argument that if you're using appreciative inquiry and you're only looking at the positive stuff, that then you're going to get a distorted view. And so the argument is of a plant that grows crooked because it can only get the light from one angle. That's the same kind of thing, that you're distorting the view of things. And I know Dave and Maree will have some examples of this, or probably not so much of that, but how they've achieved it. But later on, I'll talk about how we can get around that and perhaps have a little bit more of a balanced view on appreciative inquiry. So, and one way of that is to have a critical perspective on things, but again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the basics or the underlying theory of appreciative inquiry, but the others have got a much more practical application on how it works.
Thanks, Suzanne. Great. So next up, we've got Dave Timms to share his experiences of using appreciative inquiry. Now, Dave lives in Randwick Park, Manurewa, South Auckland, with his wife Denise and family, and he's worked with communities in Aotearoa for over 20 years. And the snazzy photo that we had in the materials we sent to you about the webinar is due to Randwick Park having received the Mitre 10 Community of the Year Award in 2017, which no doubt Dave was involved in, and Maree. So Dave, passing the raka over to you to tell us about appreciative inquiry and how you've used it.
Yeah, thanks there. And to be assured, I don't normally wear a suit. In fact, I can't stand them, but was forced to wear on that day. Hey, a part of who I am is someone who been doing social innovation for quite a long time. I kind of describe myself as someone who hates neoliberalism with a passion, but I love to make money through social enterprise, because then you can do good with it. Love Jesus for everything he stood for in regards to challenging the system that oppressed the poor, but I've also been accused of a socialist, which I kind of liked when I worked out what I meant. I'm part of a church order called Urban Neighbours of Hope, and love seeing hope in all and working towards social change from the bottom up. And my wife and I, family, we live and work and play in the same neighbourhood. As you can probably see, I've got a bit of a confused personality, still trying to work out who I am. A bit of a kind of a background. It's good for me to paint a context of where we're working from, so you can understand how we've applied the AI. So for years I've been doing youth work, and in youth work you kind of concentrate on individuals, and you can only do as much as you can with individuals until you realise that you've got to start working with the whole family and the extended whānau. But after a while of doing that, you kind of realise that you've also got to start working with the neighbourhood to bring the social changes that you want. because all families live in a neighbourhood. And after a while of doing that, you start to realise that you actually need to work with council. And then after you're doing that, you start to realise you've got to work with government. So AI is kind of one tool of many that's good to use in terms of a context of doing neighbourhood development or community-led development. And you can use AI with both with individuals and with groups. You can use it with people in high places of power and also with those that are sitting on the margins. AI is quite reliant on good facilitation skills, but it is driven by the participants, and so it can be quite empowering, and it does give ownership back to the participants. I think when working in groups, it's a lesson that I've learned. It's best to have an independent facilitator, someone who's not part of the group, because this removes the agendas and the conflicts of interest that can come out, and participants quickly discern when there's one of those things going on. However, I think when working with individuals, it's okay for the facilitator to be known, especially helpful when there's a deeper relationship of trust, which is a key element in using AI with individuals. And I'm going to talk around how to use AI with an individual, and Maree's going to talk more about how to use it in groups. So like what Susan said, AI has 5 Ds. You define, discover, dream, design, and then deliver. And I'll take that through with you through a story with an individual of a guy called Ben. We call him Big Ben, a young adult that lives in our neighbourhood, and he's given me permission to tell his story. So I've known Big Ben for over 7 years now, 7-8 years. He lives in our neighbourhood, and our neighbourhood has had all the wrong indicators of the poverty kind of issues. And he left school, had little qualifications. He was dabbling in unhealthy stuff. He was unemployed at the time I met him, and he was drifting towards a life of state dependency. But at the same time, he oozed leadership. It was written all over him. So we invited Ben to join a small group that we were developing of young adults, kind of designed to develop the leadership and to focus on youth work, called Warriors of Change. And this was really important for a foundation for AI to be used, because he needed to have a place to belong and a place to be valued. And joining Warriors of Change meant he had some place to belong and a place to be valued, and he found some purpose, and he could be proactive with his life. So, and he began his work with youth there. It was also a place where he started to learn to trust me, and he gave me permission to speak into his life. So I started to play a mentoring role, which is an important part of doing community work. So as Ben became more and more passionate about youth, we sat down and used the AI process to do a 5-year kind of life plan with him, dreaming about his future and helping him to have some focus as to where he could go. And this is part of the defining part, the first part. So with Ben and I, we were able to define that what we were going to do through the AI process was have a 5-year plan. And defining that kaupapa is important because it keeps you focused on what you're doing, and so you don't drift off in all kind of other areas, which is really nice to do, but not always that helpful. Also, you kind of working with individual, you've also got to help people work at their inner life, because there are blocks in people's lives that can stop the full impact of the AI process. AI is not a tool to do that and to work at those blocks, and it doesn't answer everything. So you need other tools to work alongside AI. And I think it's really good to be aware of 2 aspects that are going on for people as you're doing it. And the first thing is that words create worlds. So the narratives that we start telling ourselves, that our whānau are telling, and that the neighbourhood speaks about, defines the world that we create. And so we had to work hard on the narrative that Ben had of himself. Sometimes his poverty mindset dictated his life, and sort of undermining poverty is this theme of I am a nobody and I deserve this, I'm unworthy, this is what life has to offer, I don't have options. And if that's a theme that's quite dictating, you've got to get into a place to do AI where people can start to think and dream and start working differently. So you're kind of working against the tide with those strong themes that are there. But also, everyone has, no matter where they come from, has a past where there's incredible strength, or where they found great joy, or where they felt truly alive. And that's the aspect that Appreciative Inquiry taps into. So our past, when we understand what it was, can be a great motivator for changing us into the present and for influencing who we become in the future. And so this is what happened for Ben. We discovered he had a real passion for young people. He told stories of how he loved his nephews and nieces and loved to make them laugh and to feel safe, to feel important, and for them to start to be successful. So this was part of the next stage, the discovery stage. It's about tapping into the past and finding the skills, the strength and passions that people carry. So we ask questions of Ben around things like, when you think of your past, when you're doing something positive, when you're feeling most alive, what were you doing? And who was it that you were with, and what emotions were you experiencing? So you're tapping into people's hearts and into people's heads. And Ben's past, the place that gave him life, and his growing self-awareness and his growing capacity, he quickly grabbed at the idea of youth work and working with his family. And so we discovered that his life passion was working with kids and doing youth work. And so that led us into the next stage. So we started to dream. So what could this look like? So I asked him a question. With your life passion, with your life dream, what's the ideal picture that you could see for yourself? What's the ideal thing that you'd love to work towards? Where would you like to head with this? And he knew instantly. He just straight away just said, look, I just love to move back to my village in Rarotonga, and I'd love to start to doing youth work there. So he saw a need, and it fitted into his life passion. And what we needed to do now was to work at a plan to kind of outwork his dream, to make it possible. And what I find interesting in this whole process is that when people are able to start to outwardly use words and to publicly express their dream world, they start to create that world themselves. So when you start to plan and design the pathways towards that dream, then the reality that that dream is possible creates a new hope. And when individuals can grasp it, there's a new hope that something can be different, it changes everything. And it's just amazing what happens within them, and their behaviors and everything just change. And so for Ben, we sat down after kind of, doing that work around defining and then discovering and then dreaming. Then we had to get down to some more kind of realities and start to actually design what a 5-year plan would look like for Ben to help to get to his dream. And so we started to break down what they could be. So education wasn't a high part for him. So we enrolled him in a certificate in youth work at a level 4 level, and it was a good kind of introduction into the education sector. But it also led for him into doing a bachelor in primary school teaching. And so what he realised is that doing youth work in Rarotonga was highly unlikely to be funded. So he needed to sustain the idea, he needed to find himself a well-paid job like teaching, so that he could work part-time and then do youth work part-time. And but because there are also kind of big gaps in his teaching, we had to do a pre-teaching course with him before he could enter into Teachers Training College. So this is kind of moving now from the designing the 5 years with him, and it laps over into the delivery. So it's actually the doing of the design. How do we actually do this? And so by Ben starting to, first of all do the certificate in youth work, and then he qualifies in it and he succeeds. So success breeds success. And and walking alongside him, having the neighbourhood walk alongside him, having mentors walk alongside him, having his family starting to praise him because he's starting to have success, his confidence and his capacity kind of grows. And what AI, the process of AI, what it did for him is it moved him out of that deficit thinking, which Susan was talking about. It's moved him out of that poverty mindset and into a more kind of a proactive, strength-based approach to his life. And it highlighted his passions for his past, from his past, but he still had to find the courage to take the new opportunities. And so that was something he had to dig deep during times, because it wasn't always easy. He was also willing to work on his own life, his own inner life, what I call the shadow, and he didn't run away from it. So he kept on working with the things that he needed. So AI on itself is not enough. You've got to have other stuff alongside it. But AI, the process of AI just really creates a new pathway for people, for individuals to start looking into a new future. And we kind of got to understand that we're made up of three parts as an individual. We're made up of our past, and our past influences who we are right now in the present, and what's happening to us in the present influences the way that the decisions that we make and the direction we go to in the future. If our past, the narrative of our past has been quite full on, then the echoes of the past will influence who we are in the present, which will then limit the opportunities that are for us in the future. So what AI does is it looks into your past and it highlights the areas where you were successful, or where you discovered life, or where you found joy, or where you found a passion. And even though your past could have been quite dark, every single person has experienced something that's been good about life. And AI helps you to focus on that, and then it just builds on that. And so, and that can be quite life-changing for individuals as they start to see a possibility of a new future. And so Ben qualified as a teacher. He now teaches in Mangere, and his kids in his class have really helped him to revision his dream for Rarotonga, and his passion for the idea that he had 6-7 years ago now is growing. And last Christmas, this is the last few slides, David, over Christmas, Ben went back to his village in Rarotonga for holiday, and just to see what is possible. So his dream is still alive, which I think is incredible. So that's just one example of many. And right now I'm doing the same kind of process with 7 other individuals in the neighbourhood. I have no idea what the outcomes will be. It's fascinating hearing people's dreams. It's mind-blowing actually hearing people's dreams, and then walking alongside them towards those dreams is an incredible experience. So highly recommend Appreciative Inquiry. Thanks everyone.
Awesome, thanks Dave. It's great to hear about all that great work you're doing, eh? So next up we've got Maree, who's been working with Dave in Randwick Park. She's got years of experience working with families and groups in Aotearoa. So Maree, passing the rako over to you.
Hi, thanks very much. Hey, it's welcome everyone. It's such a privilege to share the stories of the stuff that I've been able to do over the last couple of years. Randwick Park's been my home for about 15 years, and it's the Takanini Strait that is taking forever to get done. That's where we are. We're right there on the eastern side, and so that's where we are. And I was just thinking this morning, unless someone who like you cares an whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. And I think in Randwick, that's one of the things that's kind of changed what we've done. We've been a group of people that have just wanted some change to happen, and have realised that it's not going to happen unless we actually do something. And so the picture that's up there at the moment is the picture of our skate park. It's pretty cool. It was designed by local skaters. The only bits that don't work on it, I think, are the bits that somebody decided that they knew what to do better. But the skate park and stuff is an amazing place, and behind it you can see a building that's called Manu Tuktutuku. It's our community centre with sports and all sorts of community activities that happen there. On the right side you can see there are some lights. That's where we have sports and things happening, and on the left you'll see that there's a little piece of land that has nothing on it just at the moment. But I'm going to tell you what's going there. So Randwick Park has kind of a reputation in some places of the good, the bad and the ugly. We're known for being Community of the Year, but we're also known that some pretty not nice things have happened around here. But it depends on who you talk to, depends on what view you kind of have. Now, I've had the privilege of working in the primary school as a teacher aide and absolutely loved it. The kids there are just amazing. And when I was asked to do some appreciative inquiry in the community, I sort of looked at it and went, who am I connected to? Who can I work with? And for me, it was the kids. So we'd done a couple of things. Foundation North, love them, have put in some money to help us to do appreciative inquiry in the community. And when I started, I sort of went, okay, it was like, no, can't find it. I looked up things on the internet. A lot of it was about business. And I sort of went, I just don't get how to make this appreciative inquiry actually work. And so when I looked at it, I thought, let's work with we were going to work with the skaters and the people who use the park and see what ideas they had and use appreciative inquiry there. The building has an amazing kitchen, and it was designed by a whole heap of women who had worked in some wonderful kitchens, and so they added their 5, 10, 20 cents worth. And then the last one, I went, I really want the kids to come up with something, because at the end of the day, it's the kids who are going to be using the park. They're the ones in the community who really hold the future for it. And so I went down to the principal and I said, could I do this with some kids? And she said, yeah, I'll give you a group of year 8 students. And I went, okay, let's see what happens. And so I went away and I did a bit of looking at different things, and I looked at how to tell these positive questions, and I looked at what to do next. And I went, look, I'm just going to jump in, give it a go, see what happens, learn as you go, that kind of principle. So what I did was I went down and I met with this group. Now, there were about 8 year 8s. The problem was that every week, some of them couldn't make it. I had a different group. But what didn't change was what we could do with them. So on the very first day, we did a bit of a discovery. So I just sat down with them, and I think they were expecting, for them to answer questions and get things right. And I said, no. What I want you to do is to tell me about your experience. So, and they sort of looked at me and I said, what makes Randwick a great place to live? And they sort of sat there, and I don't think anyone had ever asked them, people had asked what makes Randwick not a nice place to live. But I think when they got asked what makes Randwick a great place to live, it made them really stop and think about their area. It made them stop and think about things. And at that stage, the skate park had just been opened. They said the skate park, you can read the list there, fun, the courts, the friends, breakfast club. Steve runs the awesome breakfast club. The holiday programs, the Christmas in the park things, all these different things that they could do, the opportunities for sport, people helping each other, fundraising, integrity. That's how they saw Randwick Park. Now, the beauty is it can't be wrong because it's their experience of it. And I think when you start asking these questions about what makes, or what can you see that makes it really good, it's their experience. They actually can't be wrong. And that's what I kind of love, because it's about them. And so as I started to listen, I started to go, wow, this is how they see this world of Randwick Park. So I looked at it and went, so how do we get more of this good stuff? How do we make it more interesting? How do we make it even better? And so they started to come up with ideas like, well, hard work and all these kind of fundraising and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of went, sounds like a lot of hard work to me. But when I came back the next week, and I would often have a different group, we started to look at our dream. And I think to dream, you can't separate it from the discovery. The discovery feeds into the dream. So because they'd discovered what was great about Randwick, think about that. Think about what you said was great about Randwick. What would make it even better? So what have you already got? What do you already do? Now, I was lucky enough in this process to have a researcher work beside me, and I was able to just sit down at the end of the day and go, they said this and they were doing this, and she recorded it, which was absolutely fabulous. So but she works a lot with community capitals, and we're looking at that at the moment. And what do you already have in your community that can make it work? Not what do you have to go outside and try and bring in, but actually what do you already have? So this is Dr. Gilly Stewart. She taught me a lot at this stage about, you know, you have finances, you have people, you have natural resources, you have political connections, you have all these things already related to the projects that you're doing. And so all these answers told us something. So we got to the dream stage, and I said to them, what will make Randwick Park an even better place to live? Just imagine. No, I'm not putting any boundaries on you. I just want you to imagine what it might look like. And so they started to say, well, it'd be great if we had an art gallery here. Well, that just blew me out of the water, because I didn't know they were even interested in art. Skate competitions, a big shelter at the park, sunscreen dispensers in the park, all these really interesting things that started to come out that we wouldn't have even thought about, in a sense, as adults. I love the Zumba classes to get the adults out of their comfort zone. We actually did that as a side. It wasn't one of our deliveries, but we actually did it. But chess clubs and family activities, all these kind of things. But they also came out with, we'd love a big slide and a flying fox, and we'd love to put more stuff in the park. And I went, okay, well, that's really cool. So we just let them post-it note crazy, and they just put them all up on the wall, and it was just fantastic. And I sort of sat there and went, wow, imagine if we could get any of those things, would be better than what we've got now. And one of the girls sat there, and I said to her, I said, so if we could make one of these things happen, which one do you think we could make happen? And all of a sudden it was that actually, and I've heard that a lot of people start with the discover and the dream, and then they stop, because that's like that's the fun phase of dreaming and imagining what it could look like. But actually moving into what will we do is a whole nother step. And so I said to the group, well, which one would we do? And I kind of was sitting there going, oh, that one would be a good one, and I know a little bit about that one, and I know a little bit about that one. And they sat there, and I was just really quiet because I didn't want to influence their outcome. And so they sat there and they talked about it, and they said, I think we should do sunscreen in the park. I think we should get dispensers and make it a safe place, and maybe we'll work on some shade. And I went, oh yeah, that's a great idea. So does everyone kind of agree with that? And so they sat there and went, oh, but a McDonald's would be awesome. And they came up with all sorts of things. And then one girl said, hey guys, you remember what we've been learning in class? And they have an amazing teacher who's really awesome with words. And she had been teaching them the phrase, and I'm sorry, I don't know who said it, but the bigger the challenge, the bigger the opportunity. And so you can see we've written it right in the middle of the page. And I said, so what does that mean for you? What do you really want to do? And they all looked at each other and said, let's build a playground. And they were so excited, and everything inside me went, I don't know how to do that. I've never built a playground before. And so it was kind of scary for me, but they sort of sat there and they did believe that they could do it. And that whole words create worlds, once they'd spoken it and once they'd said it, that was what was happening. So I went back to the office and went, what am I going to do? This is exciting, but it's also really nerve-wracking, because I think a lot of us like to know what the end product is. We like to know what it will look like. And AI kind of leads you down a path to start with of this dreaming and going wherever you want to, and then pulling it into what's practical and what can we do, but what's a bit further than perhaps what our comfort zone is. And so you'll be surprised what will come up as a result of it. So I went back to the person who'd helped us to get the building, and he'd helped us with the project work in the park. So Damien Powley, he was at Auckland Council at the time, and I went, here's one of our existing capitals. It's a person in council. Help! How do we get a playground? And we knew that in the original plan there were always plans to have a playground. And so I took him along with Tina, who's actually a playground designer for council. And I knew that they'd taken down the old one, and I said, what's the chances of these kids actually getting their dream to happen? And they went, well, yeah, because there's money left in the budget from taking the old one out, and that's great. And I said, so what would that get you? Because I've never been playground shopping before. What would that actually get you? And they said, oh, it would probably get you maybe 2 or 3 things, and it would give you a place. It's normally what we put in. And I said, oh, okay then. So we talked with the group and we said, if you could just close your eyes for a minute, if it was 2 years from now and you could see what it looked like, what would you see? And so it's that whole, what's the ideal? What should it be? And so what we did, because those kids were starting to get to an age where playing on a playground, they're starting to get a bit older. And so we said, well, let's get the ideas of all the kids in the school. And so we put together this box of design your own playground, and we sent it out. Now I sent out 12 of these boxes, and I had all sorts of craft things, all sorts of bits and pieces in it, and it was a lot of fun. I sent out these boxes, and I said, how are you going with it? And over the holidays, they sort of they worked on it, and they said, well, come and have a look. And so I went down to have a look at it, and lo and behold, I got 23 models, full models of playgrounds. And I sort of looked at it and went, wow, these kids are really imaginative. They'd been online, they'd done all sorts of things, and actually the next slide will show you the different designs that they came up with. So you can see that they came up with all sorts of things. The first one is their flying fox. The second one has a shade. We had to laugh. It's a gazebo, but in South Auckland apparently it's a gazebo. So we're having a gazebo being built. You can see all the different things that they imagined, everything from inbuilt trampolines to swings to surfboards, all sorts of things that they came up with. And so this was some of the stuff that they did. And so I looked at this and I just went, wow, this is quite amazing. They've come up with it. So I showed the designer, and she took photos of the things that she saw that the kids repeatedly were asking for. And she went back, and this is the part that's the deliver, it's the create what will be. And so we looked into this, and so this design, this whole playground design, is totally designed by kids. It's coming up. I'm really looking forward to seeing it, and I've just loved the process. I've loved just getting into it and letting it go as a facilitator, letting it go wherever it wants to go, and then pulling it in and coming up with a plan. Now, this is kind of the part of it where the kids were working on. But you'll see on this one, on the delivery one, how the designer has taken their pictures and has actually turned it into playground equipment. So you'll see at the top, there's the big tentacle thing. That piece of equipment is called a rocktopus, and that is going in at the moment. You'll see that they wanted a flying fox. Their flying fox is going in at the moment. And all the different things that they saw, and council, local board have been amazing. We've got an amazing relationship with them. And so we're working with all these different capitals to actually make it happen. Now I'm going to show you the next slide is as much as I can show you, because as we speak, just in the park next to my house, the builders are building the playground, and it's so exciting because I remember going back and showing the kids the design. That's the bit on the right. I showed them the design, and one of the boys took a look at it and he said, "That's my playground. I built that." And so he'd physically built it with the design in a box. And then he'd come up, and this is the design that they're starting to build now. And you can see the kids that are growing up in the community. Now, this has taken the community 2 years to get. We've had extra money put into it as a result of the hard work that the kids have done. And it's really exciting to watch it. And we're going to have the opening in March. So we're really excited. But I've grown over the time to really love the process of doing this, because I wouldn't have ever dreamed that the kids and I would be working on building a playground. So I'm all for it, and we're hoping to share more of our experience and how the step-by-step how we actually did it. We're hoping to have workshops out here, and so if anyone's interested, get in touch and we will let you know when the next one is. But thanks for the opportunity to share the story.
Kia ora, Maree, thanks for that. Hey, we've had a partai, and to all of you, please feel free to question us, send in questions. You can tweet them at Good Research, or text us, or just use the chat feed. From Dawn asking, were there any times where you wondered if parts of the Appreciative Inquiry process weren't going to work? That's for Maree.
Oh, every day. Only because only because you sit there and it's so, in some ways it's quite, like Suzanne was saying, it's quite idealistic and quite too positive, too Pollyanna-ish. But actually it's amazing what you can do, and it's amazing what's possible. And I think that's what you have to keep your mind open to, is what's possible, and not close down ideas because, oh no, we couldn't do that. There's always a way to make things happen. And honestly, I look at it and I'm blown away.
Awesome. Thanks, Maree. So good to hear about your journey with Appreciative Inquiry and the cool things that are happening in your community that came out of that work. Now, just to let you know, we've got further resources on Appreciative Inquiry to share, which we'll send out to you all after the webinar. But if there's anybody who's desperate for information straight away, you can have a look at our What Works website, whatworks.org.nz, and that'll tell you more about Dave's story and Maree's story, and give you a brief background on Appreciative Inquiry. Now, the last section of our webinar is back to Suzanne to tell us about where she got to with developing critical appreciative processes and how that's changed her work with community groups. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Jenna. Well, actually, that question that Maree just had is absolutely perfect for leading into what I want to say, because with when I first used this as a research process, my first few groups, I did discovery and dream together in one session, and then came back a couple of weeks later to do, in another session to do the final two. And one group I got to, we'd done really well. We'd had really exciting, amazing stuff in discovery and dream. And I came back to them the next time and said, okay, so how can we pull all these things that we're really good at to get together to achieve what we want to get to? And the chairperson of the group said to me, it's never going to happen. Dreams are shackled by costs and practicalities. And at that point, the rest of his group just took their lead from what he said, and the whole group just shut down. And it was really sad that I never got any further with that group, because that was it. They just mentally shut down, taking the lead from their chairperson. So that really goes back to reinforce what Maree and Dave have been saying about how words create our worlds. And it goes back to my key point about our action, our knowledge, and our thinking is all linked together. And so one way we can get around this is when you think about critical theory, people often think, oh, critical theory, it's all negative and it's all critiquing everything and it's saying what's wrong with the situation, which is obviously totally different to what appreciative inquiry is. But critical theory isn't actually critiquing and saying what's wrong with the situation. Critical theory is all about challenging the assumptions that we bring to a situation. So like Maree said, she assumed she could never design a playground because she had never done it before. But once she actually took a step back and challenged that assumption, she found out she could do it. So if we look at critical theory, and critical theory is actually all about wanting to develop change, which is exactly what appreciative inquiry is. So without getting too theoretical, if you delve down into it, the two approaches actually want to achieve the same thing, but they're just perhaps coming from it from a slightly different perspective. So it's really important, I would say, to not get really hung up on, if you don't actually tick off each of the 5 Ds in a nice linear order, don't panic. A lot of what I've found is the value in appreciative inquiry lies in its intent. So if we make sure that we are encouraging positive discourse, that we're using positive words, encouraging positive actions, the rest will flow. It's always presented in a nice, tidy, linear little model, but life isn't like that. And so don't get hung up if you can't tick off every box, is what I'm saying. Another thing is and I think somebody had already asked, or I think it was Dave or Maree, I can't remember which one of you, sorry, talked about the importance of having an independent facilitator. And again, that's another place where your critical appreciation can come in. But as an independent facilitator, you need to be really careful about the power that you bring to the process, because appreciative inquiry, like any action research, is participant driven. So you need to make sure that the participants drive. And so one of the examples I found is I was working with a group one day, and it was a group I knew really well because it was a board I was actually part of. And we'd done, again, amazing discovery and dream. But then when we got to the next stage, they just went down and down and down and down. And they kept talking about everything that was going wrong. And I was trying to jolly them along and get us back onto a positive mindset, and it just didn't work. And in the end, I had to actually realize that that was their way of being positive. They had to actually get all that stuff off their shoulders or out of their heads. And eventually they kind of hit rock bottom. Somebody in the group said, well, we could sit here and moan and groan about this all day, but it's never going to change anything unless we change and we do something different. And so it showed to me that although they weren't talking in nice Pollyanna, positive, rah-rah terms, they still needed to get all that out. And that, in a way, was positive to them. So you have to be really aware of the power you bring. So like I said, challenge the assumptions we take in. As an independent facilitator, challenge your perception of what's good. Make sure that you're letting the group define what is good and the group think what's happening. As I said, don't get hung up in the mechanics of it. And so another way, the big thing is don't just focus on what is good. Be fully conscious, take full and sufficient account of everything that's happening around us. And so, yeah, examples that I've had, and some of it's very similar to what Dave and Maree were talking about, is I did some work with community policing. And obviously the work that community police officers encounter, there's not always something good in their day. And one of the examples, so they started to use it as just another tool in their toolkit for addressing situations. So they sat down and talked to this 12-year-old kid, and they said to him, well, what do you like doing? And even the kid's mother was sitting there with him, and she's thinking, well, nobody ever asked my kid what he likes doing or what he's good at, particularly the police. They're always telling him what he's bad at. Mm-hmm. And when he said, oh, I like to draw. So they thought, okay, well, we'll see if we can find ways to get him out of graffiti into doing some positive art in the community, things like that. I've had students use critical appreciative processes working in rest homes, looking at the way operations and decision-making happens in rest homes. And I've got an ex-student who now works for corrections, and he's actually using critical appreciative processes as part of his planning and developing of tools, not more so at this stage with the staff working at corrections, but again helping them to realise that not everything they come across in their day is necessarily good, but if we look at it from a wider perspective and take into account the assumptions we're bringing to the situation, we can actually make that situation better, and we have a greater opportunity to develop more positive change from that. So yeah, that's probably the easiest way of saying that. Don't get hung up on the mechanics, don't get hung up on having to always be good, just challenge the assumptions you bring into the situation, and that will also challenge your thinking. And because our words create worlds, or our thinking, actions and knowledge are all inexplicably linked, well then that way we can change the way we create our outcomes, which is essentially what appreciative inquiry is all about.